so I began compiling a series of notes and outlines on how we might take a kind of a fresh look at the Roswell 1947 case. And the result was the book that I've just released about a week ago, called Ultimate Guide to the Roswell UFO Crash, a tour of Roswell's UFO landmarks. So basically, in this book, we're looking at the Roswell 1947 UFO crash from a new perspective, looking at the latest data that has come forward, the most striking eyewitness testimony that we have on hand, and taking a look at the case from the angle of examining each significant place where the Roswell incident occurred. And in the book, I've identified 35 separate places where major incidents of the Roswell case took place. A chronological look at the Roswell case, moment by moment, is how this started off, and then took a cross-angle look from the perspective of each location, each of these 35 locations where something significant happened in 1947 there in Roswell, New Mexico. We gain knowledge and we gain a new perspective by looking at things from a different angle. The Roswell case is probably, in addition to being the most famous UFO case in the world, it's also the one that's been investigated and looked at and documented and written about probably more than any other. So there are a lot of books out there and there's a lot of viewpoints out there. What I wanted to do, when I first visited Roswell 4 years ago, that was the first time I ever went there, my attitude was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is Roswell, everybody talks about it. I've seen on the national news coverage of the July festival that they have every year, and there's little kids running around with alien masks on, and it's going to be one of those touristy things. And there's a certain, what I discovered was that there's a certain element on the surface of that, but at the same time, and now having been there 4 years in a row that Ruben and I have been at the UFO Museum annual event, there's a lot that really strikes you about the atmosphere there, and in visiting these places that I talk about in the book, it really comes through that something significant happened there, something of great historical value in terms of UFO history. And so what I wanted to do, one of the things that I discovered when I first went to Roswell 4 years ago for the first time was there was no easy way to find out exactly how the Roswell incident played out and where all the significant locations were. And nobody had done anything along the lines of identifying the specific locales of the Roswell incident. So I saw this as an opportunity to put together a little guidebook, if you will. And the way my book is laid out, it's basically designed for someone to carry it with them on a place-by-place tour of the city of Roswell and the immediate surrounding area, to look at these 35 sites and experience for themselves exactly what happened back in July 1947. And one of the guys who really helped me with this book, by the way, was John Lemay, who is an author in his own right. He has written a couple of books about Roswell's history. The most recent one is called Images of America, Roswell, and it's a photographic journey through Roswell's past. And one of the things that, when I approached him with the idea for this new book, he said, wow, he said, I've lived in Roswell all my life, and some of the places you mentioned in the book I didn't even know about. So he was really turned on by the idea, and here's a gentleman who spends a lot of his time, looking through the history of Roswell and of the Chavez County and neighboring Lincoln County. So I was very encouraged by that. And he said, Noe, what you've done here, you heard the phrase, if these walls could talk. Well, really, your book is about making the walls talk. For instance, Building 84, where the crashed UFO and the alien bodies were brought after their recovery by the U.S. military. And there were a number of eyewitnesses who testified, who gave signed affidavits that they saw bodies and they saw UFO crash debris being stored there. That's just one example of the many eerie places that I talk about in this new book. There are 35 places in my book. What I've done is, using over 100 photographs, I have presented each place both the way it was in the 1940s, using historical images from the Historical Society of Southeast New Mexico, provided to me by the archivist there, Elvis Fleming, and also by John Lemay, the author that I was mentioning earlier, who works part-time there, who volunteers his time there. So they provided me the historical photographs for each of the sites. We tried to get photos that were as close to the 1940s as possible. And then we've got photographs that we took by going to each of these locations and taking photographs of what that site looks like today, kind of a compare and contrast. Then we've got, in addition to the photographs of then and now, we've got excerpts from eyewitness testimony about what happened there at each location.
When you talk about the Roswell incident, can you just give me an encapsulation of that so I can, get an intelligent overview?
Okay. Well, the world's most famous UFO case, and there's a lot of talk about Roswell. It's been in the air for years, but it wasn't until I actually started focusing in on and reading the eyewitness testimony, reading through the documents, reading through the books that have been published, and sorting out all the information. It wasn't until then that really the whole Roswell case coalesced in my mind. Because the problem is here, actually, believe it or not, we've got too much information about Roswell that's been in the public eye, and a lot of it is wrong or incorrect or over-dramatized by Hollywood and so forth. And so trying to get back to the core, I focused on the actual historical documents of what happened in 1947. I went back as close to the original sources of the eyewitness affidavits that have been filed in the case.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet.